welcome to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. I am your no hair, very bald host, Mookie Spitz, and the one full of heart today is Dr. Barbara Minton. Welcome aboard, Barbara.
Thank you, Mookie. It's great to be here.
Great, and I can't wait to talk about music as a therapy. The acclaimed Dr. Sachs has referred to music not as a luxury, but as a necessity, and not only for his patients, but for all humans. He felt that music had an inherently therapeutic quality, that it was food for the soul, and I'm tacitly assuming that you would agree with him.
Yes, I totally would. And it's so interesting that we've had music forever and ever, right? We've had generations and generations of people. There's something very innate about our need to listen to and to make music. And then the real question is, how do we harness this in order to activate the healing process in our own body and minds?
I think most folks, whether they consciously realize it or not, do this. Music is pervasive. Music is ubiquitous in the sense of it being plugged into our lives. We listen to music when we're doing other things. We've grown up with music. And we tacitly assume that music makes us feel good. Music improves our mood. Music is a motivator at the gym. Music is around us. So how is your point of view more refined in terms of applying what most people assume to be true in a way that's more clinically therapeutic?
You know, that's such a good question. And what I would say to that is that we don't always use music in a way that's helpful to us. And let me give you an example. I had a 20-year-old client that was very anxious, and he loved listening to rap music. And based on EEG, I can create these three-dimensional pictures of the brain and what the brain is doing. So I said to him, well, let's map your brain. Let's see what your brain is doing before you listen to rap music and then after you listen to rap music. And let's look at the anxiety network and see if rap music is making it better or worse. Well, you might imagine that we discovered that when he listened to rap music, although he liked rap music, it actually made his anxiety worse. And when he saw that the anxiety network in his brain was worse listening to rap music, he said, well, maybe I should make a different choice about music. So we don't always really think about what it is this music is doing to us, or maybe use it in the most nuanced, powerful way.
That's interesting. And for me, it's a little bit counterintuitive. So allow me for a second to illustrate an example of how I use music therapeutically. I love EMD, the electronic dance music, and it has a very rhythmic, intense, by definition, trance-like repetition to it. And that comes across as understandable given your framework. And I also listen to Scandinavian heavy metal music, which is very, very rapid in its beats per minute. It's a melding of Metallica guitars, sometimes symphonic choirs, and it's over the top dramatically and in terms of sonic intensity. And I've come to discover that I love both, especially the Scandinavian heavy stuff, because it's a dopamine booster for me. I have the ADHD, and I find that music, especially the EDM and the metal, have a calming effect, much like a stimulant would.
Well, you'll love this great research study that was done where they showed that when they played music to kids with ADHD, their reading comprehension actually went up. When they played music to kids without ADHD, their reading comprehension actually went down. It's so cool, right?
we've retroactively diagnosed your patient there as not having ADHD. So the heavy rap music was actually detrimental.
And you see this sometimes with musicians too, because they tend to be very sensitive to music and they'll be like, man, I can't listen to background music when I'm doing anything because my mind goes completely to the music and not on what I'm trying to concentrate on. Whereas other people will be like, oh, that's so good because it keeps my mind when I have something in the background like that, music in the background, and I'm curious what your experience is about this, then it actually allows me to focus better.
Yes, I tend to get distracted. So when I'm immersed in work, anything that demands any kind of focus or concentration, I do prefer dead silence
Yeah.
because it's a complete ADHD immersion into that. And I think a key takeaway early on here is that music, in terms of its therapeutic effects and its potentially detrimental effects, are highly subjective, personalized, and based on the disposition and physiology of the person listening.
I love that you said that because one of the points that I've tried to make in this early research that I've done is that people's response differs to this music depending on what they come in with. So if you are super tired, you know, activating music is going to have one effect on you. If you're super wired, that same music might push you over the top. So, yeah, it makes a huge difference. And I think thinking about the idea of personalized medicine, personalized approaches to wellness, this is the direction we really need to go. Not everyone needs to listen to the same music, right? I mean, you go into the gym and they're playing,
Yeah.
this intense kind of rock type music, and some of the people like it and other people are just cringing and they can't wait to get out of there.
Yeah, you make a fascinating point about personalized medicine and also individualized, nuanced taste. Very few art forms elicit such strikingly different reactions on the part of the recipient as music. It defines us. We create flattering reflections of ourselves based on our set lists, our playlists, based on our choice. I remember in high school, which band you liked defined your identity and value as a person. And all this makes sense within that context, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting, because we don't do that so much with other art forms. Like, you don't hear a bunch of high school kids talking about what visual artist do you like, right?
Yes. It was really all about music. Music defined you.
Yeah, there's something so integral about music and how it affects our bodies and our brains that we create these whole identities around it. It's quite fascinating, really.
And I just think it points to its inchoate power and
Hmm.
its applicability for both good and bad.
Right?
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And you see this, if most of us have been through romantic breakups, some of us many times,
yeah.
um, and you can listen to this breakup music, and for a while that's good, right? Because it kind of validates where you are emotionally. But if 6 months later and 8 months later you're wallowing around in this breakup music, it's gone over the edge and it isn't so good for you anymore. And you need to kind of move on to use music to help you kind of go down a healing path. And when you start to think about music in this way, it changes your use of it. Athletes have been very good at this. Good athletes, I should say, have been good at this for a long time, because if you're a jogger, you pace your music to where it is you want to be jogging. And you don't go too fast or too slow. And so athletes learn this probably much earlier than many others of us have.
Yeah, that reflects my lived experience in a number of different ways. First off, I had a big breakup and I obsessively listened to Maroon 5, that band, which I normally would never listen to. And I listened to them while jogging. I was a big jogger. I did all the New York half marathons and the full
Wow.
marathon, and I always did them with with earbuds, listening to music, sometimes podcasts. And during this phase, I was running and wallowing in this destroyed romance and listening to this Maroon 5 emo music. And now I hear their songs and I'm like, oof, okay. But it helped me get through.
What did it do for you that was so
I
compelling?
just emotionally so connected at that
Yeah.
time with the tonality, the songwriting, and the lyrics. The feeling of those songs perfectly captured my mood at the time. And my purpose was to wallow in my own sadness and through that catharsis get over it. And then after I healed, the medicine didn't taste as good or have
Yeah.
any real effect. And your second point is terrific too. I don't think I would be a jogger or exercise as much as I do if it wouldn't be for music, because
Mhm.
music is such an integral part of my experience of exercising. Whether I'm riding a bike, the home Peloton, jogging, even swimming if I can, the earbuds are always there and they create a rhythmic texture and they're firing that dopamine in my head so that I don't even really pay attention to the difficulty of the workout. So I could run a half marathon and not even be cognizant of the discomfort and even pain because I was in my head and it was so soothing to have the songs playing.
Yeah, I think you bring up several points. So let me go back to your first one about mood and breakups. And I think one really nice thing about music is music goes beyond language. So sometimes we can't express in language what we're really experiencing emotionally, but we can access and express that through music. And it really it's I think it's one reason it's so powerful, because sometimes we don't have words to really say what we're feeling, but when we listen to or have our friend listen to music that expresses what we're feeling, there's that instant connection there that's so powerful. And then I think your example on the exercise thing is so interesting because there's multiple levels going on here when you exercise. One is that when music hits the brain, even if what the research shows is even if we tell you to sit completely still and you don't move at all, the motor strip in your brain becomes active. And so the music itself is actually activating the physiological movements in your body. So that's one level.
Yeah, so you're tapping your knee, you're shaking
Yeah,
your leg.
you're actually, yes, and certain types of registration. So it's, your head wants to bob up and down. It doesn't want to bob side to side. Like people have done research on this. Like the music makes your head want to go in a certain direction. It's kind of fascinating when you think about this. But the second is this dopamine thing. If you like the music, um, it makes you feel emotionally better, which is empowering and all the things that we probably already know about. But the third part is you also kind of implied is distraction. So when you start to feel pain and you're exercising or you feel that discomfort and you can hook into the music, what's happening is we have networks in our brain that register both pain and suffering. And those networks are separate. So you can actually register pain or discomfort and not suffer from it. And so when music impacts those networks, then it changes your experience. So it's like, I'm going to get through this last rep, even though I'm kind of in discomfort, but I'm not registering that discomfort anymore. The music is helping normalize that network.
I've never thought about that distinction the way you've described it, and it's so wonderful. This wall, in a sense, between pain, physical pain, and what we would consider our emotional reaction to that pain
Yeah.
is described or defined by suffering. So grit is a quality that behooves many of us to excel at if we want to accomplish anything. Most things we do
Mhm.
are difficult, as I try to convince my 18-year-old, have a little
Right.
grit. So
Yeah.
feel the pain, but now the way you put this, feel the pain, but you don't need to suffer through it. Find ways
Yeah.
to your point, distract yourself. And maybe listen to your favorite song while you do your homework, if that doesn't distract you too much. Or, he exercises a lot too. So I think
Yeah.
that that's brilliant and very, very useful.
One of the really interesting things about the brain is the brain learns pain, or the brain learns discomfort, or the brain learns effort. So, let me give you an example. If I said to you, "What's 3 times 5?" you would just say 15. You don't have to figure it out. And the reason that you don't have to figure it out and you just say 15 is because your brain has learned that, and it's potentiated itself. It's actually changed itself so it doesn't need to think about it anymore. It just goes there. Well, the same thing happens with pain. So if you've had chronic pain, it doesn't take actually any input. So let's say the input of the pain has gone completely away, your brain will still experience the pain because it has learned the pain. And this is really a problem with chronic pain. People that often get diagnosed with chronic pain syndromes. And so if you can actually change the brain to register the pain not as much, then people feel better. And then that other suffering network. There's also another network called the salience network that we've been talking about, and that is, what is your brain paying attention to? What is salient to your brain? And so if you make something salient to your brain and you're not paying as much attention to the effort that it takes, you're more likely to be successful. So in this Calm the Storm album that Peppino D'Agostino and I did, what we actually did was compose these songs to calm these networks down so that the pain network wouldn't be as active, the insomnia network would not be as active, and then someone feels better. So we were really like, can we compose curated music to affect these brain networks?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And just for the listeners, we'll post a link in the description. Dr. Minton, and this is a music producer you worked with. Who is your
Well,
partner?
he's just an amazing virtuosic fingerstyle guitarist.
Okay, so you collaborated with him with the express purpose of making music to calm the brain.
Yes,
Yeah, based
exactly.
on your metrics. When you go to your website, you have brain scans that show brains and their reaction to sounds, various sounds. And I love your physicalness, how you're looking at the biophysics and biochemistry of our brains and looking at this very, very physically, very scientifically. And I think that adds tremendous value. For the first aspect, it's evidence based. So you're
Mhm.
measuring brains and seeing, you're not just tacitly assuming that there is impact, and that enables you to tweak it scientifically. And it also removes the hocus pocus from a lot of these conversations, because if you don't ground it in science, then it becomes so subjective that, well, you got to take Doc Minton's word for it, but you show the data, which I think is very, very useful and helpful.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I've worked with EEG for years, and EEG is really the electrical firing patterns that our brain makes. Our brain is a pattern maker. It fires in one pattern when we're playing golf, and a different pattern when we're sleeping, and a different pattern when we're writing an essay for school. And I got really interested in how music entrains these different patterns. And so I actually took information from EEGs of people who had chronic pain or people who had insomnia or people who had migraines and said, we know that that pattern needs to fire in a different way. Can we put in music that makes it fire in that way? And I was so, oh my gosh, just so fortunate to be able to work with Pepino, who was very tolerant of me kind of saying, can we do this? Can we do that? And I mean, this album is just, it's so really beautiful and gorgeous. And his guitar playing is just so masterful. I feel so lucky to have been able to work with him.
How
And then we played this to people and mapped their brains before and afterwards. And I was like, holy cow, this is actually working. It was just such a thrill.
how did you guide him? So you're the scientist, the data-driven scientist, and you're looking for reactions, and he is the artist. So how for starters, how did you communicate with him, and how did you get him to presumably dial it up, dial it down, shift tempo, pitch, approach
Yeah.
from scientist to artist? How did that
Yeah.
communication
Well,
work?
back in the Paleolithic era, I actually went to music school. So I have a background in music. So I knew a little bit about music. And I actually originally met him because I wanted to learn guitar, and he was my guitar teacher. So um, we had a little bit of a connection there. But um, you know, what happened was we know certain things about tempo. So I was just like, hey, we need to play in this at this tempo, this so many beats per minute. We need to have phrasing that is kind of like this. We can't have too much dissonance. We have to stay within a certain note range. We have to, and he actually, I mean, he brought in pieces that he'd been thinking about that he thought might fit the kind of protocol that I was looking for. And then he would play. It was fun and nerve wracking at the same time, right? Because here's this virtuosic musician, and I'm telling him, like, can we change that note? Make it a little lower.
And it's in the name of science, by the way.
He was so kind. Oh my gosh. He was just so kind and wonderful. And I think we were both just a little bit, wow, this is such an experiment. But he was open to that. And we managed to work together very, very well. And so, and then afterwards, I actually am playing the pipe organ behind him. I don't know if you
Okay.
noticed that.
Yeah. I didn't know that was you.
Yeah, that was me. So we love those deep tones in the pipe organ. The pipe organ is a very interesting instrument because of the number of frequencies that it can make. It can make very diverse frequencies. And so we use that as a container for the warmth of the guitar. And that combination worked out really well.
That's interesting. And I'm assuming that companies like Spotify and the big streamers might be doing something similar, but with less altruistic aims. And by this I
Yeah.
mean you want people to consume your product, and you want them to consume your product so that they can be healed, so that they can be calmed, so that they can have a better quality of life. And companies who make and distribute music just want their products to be consumed, not necessarily whether it helps or hurts the recipient. This goes back to your rap
Yeah.
analogy. So there's a clear difference now between having an impact on the human brain and having a favorable impact on the human brain. So I think that's where you're headed.
Yeah, there's two things I'll say about that. The first one really is that, I can make more money being a therapist or a neurofeedback person than I can in music. But my real motivation for doing this is that you can pay thousands of dollars to a therapist for something, but what if you could just pay $20 for a CD? and get something that helped you. Like, it's so much more accessible to people. And there's data that shows, for example, certain playlists for depression reduce depression symptoms by 60%. Like, why wouldn't you do that? It cost you $20, right? So how can we make this more accessible to people? And then the second issue is really your body and your mind are doing its own healing. We're not really healing you. The music isn't treating you. It's creating a state in which your own healing can happen. And when you can spend a little bit more time in that state where your own healing can happen, powerful things can result.
Yeah, on the full spectrum of historical treatment, from, let's say, 20 years of weekly intensive Freudian psychoanalysis to really get at the heart to why you were traumatized when your diapers were changed, all the way to the other extreme end of behavioral shock therapy. There's got to be a reasonable middle, or at least a reasonable approach to balancing the purely behavioral aspect of stimuli, input and output, and the reality that we're thinking, feeling complex humans with backstories and with purpose, and some of that needs attention. So personally, I love your pragmatic approach. I found that to work best in my own life too, rather than wallow in some kind of complex, intractable problem, or at least that way it seems. You get to the heart of what's impeding your progress, and then you change it up. You apply certain best practices in your own life, which could be as simple as getting up an hour earlier, exercising for a half hour more every day, conditioning yourself not to be so reactive rather than worrying about why you are so reactive. I
Yeah.
personally like that approach, and I think your approach embodies that with simple, pragmatic, not solutions, but steps in the right direction.
There's so many things like this. Like, I do talk therapy, and I think talk therapy can be really helpful for people. I do neurofeedback, which is a form of brain training where you track EEG and you give the brain positive feedback in order to change its patterning. But these things are not mutually exclusive. And one of the things I've found, which, as will come as no surprise to you or other listeners that live in this space, is that many times it's the foundational things we need to pay attention to, and that is sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And those are so that is so difficult for us. We want to eat junk food, not sleep enough, and be a couch potato. you know it's just
Yeah, if everything from type 2 diabetes, which again, I'm no expert, but I would say fairly 90-95%.
yeah. Well, people come in and say, I want to change my brain. And I say, what are you eating? And they're like, well, so far today I've had Cheetos and a Coke. I'm like, don't waste your money. Let's work on nutrition first, because the minute we try to change your brain, it's going to go out there and try to find nutrition and food in order to change itself. And it's not going to be there. Um, it just But these things, we're talking about these as if they're simple things, but they're very hard things. It's not easy to change your eating habits or to start exercising, um, or to make sure that you get 7 or 9 hours of sleep a night. That's challenging for most of us. So I don't want to trivialize these things, but they are very foundational and they're important to work on.
So how would you advise a listener to adapt lifestyle and just basic behavioral habits to incorporate more and more effective music to attain some of these basic foundational health and wellness goals? What needs to happen?
You know, I think this particular album, "Calm the Storm," is a great wind down album. Right? You listen to a few of the tracks, you probably know that. And if you listen to the whole thing straight through, it's 31 minutes of music that's very calming. And one of the things we know, so we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So the sympathetic nervous system is our on system, and the parasympathetic nervous system is our calming system. Well, a lot of us want to be on, and then we want to just flick the light off and go to sleep. But it doesn't work that way. Our physiology, we didn't get that gift in our physiology. So it takes 1 to 2 hours for the sympathetic nervous system to calm down. So if you want to be sleeping by 11, by 9, you have to go take a walk, listen to some calming music that brings you down, like Calm the Storm or some other music that you like. Don't do anything too stimulating. And this type of music can really help you calm down and transition into a sleep state. And there's a lot of nerdy science behind that I can talk about if anybody's interested. And then the same is true in the morning. So most of us need a transition from waking up into activating. And then the question becomes, how can you use music to help you with that, to help you get out of that sleepy state into a more activated state? And, that you probably want something that starts out fairly calm, but gets a little more lively as it ramps up. So kind of moving you forward. I mean, music's so interesting because you can use it in so many ways. When I practice certain songs, I actually get exercise points on my watch because my heart starts to beat so fast to the music. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's not the movement of your hand playing
No,
the.
no. I'll be like, wow, my heart's at 145 beats per minute. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. So music does this.
Back in the earlier days of the Fitbit, some friends of mine, we all had a contest. We all got the hand band,
Oh, yeah.
and we had an exercise contest, number of steps per day. And I annihilated everyone, and
You,
everyone was jelly. And as it turned out, I'm also a writer. I spent
oh, yeah.
hours a day typing 90 words a minute, and the Fitbit was picking up the movement of my wrist. So I was the carpal tunnel triathlon athlete in
There
this
you go. See, now
in
you've
this
let out the secret.
I've let out the secret for, I think they fixed that problem since, but I find that kind of funny. But biometrics, the idea of the quantified self, I
Hmm.
think much of what you're talking about here ties into that. Everything from the deep personalization that has to occur to make it effective to this idea of measuring autonomous response basically from the body. So you can't will
Yes.
yourself, you can't lie about the reaction. You have input, reaction, and output. And if you take yourself out of that equation, in a sense, it's not a matter of opinion, but it's how your body naturally responds. And your recommendation for listeners to start with the transitional phases in our life, the singularity between wakefulness and sleep, and then sleep and waking back up again, is a great place to start applying music
Mhm.
in this calming kind of way.
I think so. And I think the other thing I would say, because not everybody has an EEG set up at home so they can look at their brain, is that you can actually start referencing yourself. Like a lot of times we're not thinking about how is this music really affecting me? But when you start to think about it and you're like, is this making me more activated? And is that what I want right now? Like I might like it, but do I really want to be more activated right now? Or is this making me want to fall asleep and I need to be activated? When you start really thinking about the effect of music or any other input, you know, then you start to become a more sophisticated consumer. And that is just, that's pure gold.
Absolutely. And now the algorithms online and in these streaming services do their best to recommend music that you would like, with the goal again of you being the mega consumer. More is more as far as the digital companies go. So they spoon feed you, and then they end up fire hosing you with content that will keep you on the platforms that will make them more money. So the competitive spirit here drives it. But what you're hinting at is just this algorithm that could better align who we are individually with the type of music, with ostensibly its purpose to get the job done better and better in terms of falling asleep easier, waking up better, and finding music that works best for you at the right time in the right place to make yourself feel better and improve your quality of life.
It's very interesting, and I hadn't thought about it. I think your comment about the streaming platforms is actually quite fascinating, and because you get more of the same, right? Or you get more related to the same, and the real goal is to get you to become more and more of a consumer of that same type of music. But let me give you an example of why you might not want to do that. So I had someone contact me whose husband had had a stroke and was having trouble walking. And I said, well, what kind of music do they like? Where was the stroke? And they said, oh, they like thus and so music. Well, thus and so music, what happens is when you listen to music that you're used to, your brain actually does not activate as much. And so I said, well, here's the type of music. We know there's certain types of music that activate different parts of the brain. This is a whole nother cool conversation about music genres. But I said, have him listen to this music, and it has to be something he's never listened to before, because that will be what most activates the brain. And so she went to the rehab center where he was and had him listen to this music. And who knows? But he got up and walked, and that day, and everybody was just, kind of amazed. Now, I don't know if it was the music or not. It could have been complete happenstance.
Yeah, it could have been Jesus. It could have been Jesus.
It could have been Jesus. Could have been lightning, energetic lightning coming down from the sky. Um, but this is that was so interesting to me, because you're really talking about exposing your brain. If you want to enliven your brain, you don't want to expose it to the same old thing. You want to expose it to something different. But you're not going to necessarily get that off a streaming platform. You're going to get what they think is going to sell to you.
Yeah, you build up tolerance for what you like, and the algorithms base it on precedent. They look backwards, not forwards, and they're
Yeah.
not sophisticated enough to excite you in ways, to your point, that might really move the needle after you've listened to that genre or that particular style over and over again. People are creatures of habit. With habit comes familiarity, and with that comes security. But we all try to strike a balance between comfort and the excitement necessary so that we don't just fall asleep and give up on life. So
Mhm.
most of our existence is this balance, this balancing act between we want everything the same, we don't want to take risks, we want it to be easy, but we need a little spark to keep it exciting enough to get us through the next day. And I think that defines you as a person, the ratio of excitement to security. And I think what you're getting at is when you're looking at any kind of therapy that involves stimulation, you always need to be on the edge of, it's got to be comfortable enough so that you can pay attention and feel relaxed, but it needs to have at least that much edge where it's firing the neurons to have its real effect.
Yeah, and there might be another piece to this too, which is that you don't know what it is you're really going to resonate to until you discover it. So let me give you an example. So I play pipe organ, which is not exactly the most popular instrument in the known universe. You're not going to find it on your Spotify feed probably coming through.
Unless
Um,
you're a church-going person.
Right, exactly, and its hymns are, some, but I don't play that kind of pipe organ, but I had some teenagers and 20-year-olds who'd never heard pipe organ before, and I took them in, and they came to a pipe organ concert with me, and they were blown away. And what happened was, and you see this with young kids when maybe they've never played a piano before, and some portion of them, when they start to play those first few notes, everything comes alive for them. Not all kids, some. So if you don't expose yourself to those experiences, you might never find those resonant. It's sort of like, wow, this is who I am. And people talk about this all the time, right? I found my authentic journey because I exposed myself to this experience that I never even knew was out there. And this goes far beyond music, of course. So, this is the importance of, I think what you're saying is living just on the edge where there's just a little bit of discomfort allowing for growth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now everyone is talking about the AI revolution to the point where if I hear that acronym,
Oh my
I'm at
gosh.
the point of almost physical revulsion because, yes, it's a revolution and changing everything, but it's already become such a cliche that I just don't even want to hear about it. So now I'm the one introducing it into this conversation. So I plead guilty. But I think it's relevant in the sense that if we can get the technology to better understand us as people, and this goes back to the quantified self, this goes back to everything that you've been talking about personalized medicine and our unique individual way of potentially using music to improve our quality of life, then there might be a role for this advanced technology to do exactly what you're describing, which is find songs and music and artists and genres that are in that sweet spot between what soothes you and relaxes you, but at the same time stimulates you and triggers enough of that biochemistry to make a difference.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see where AI goes. I'm not a. I think there's a lot of promise with AI, honestly. The things that, but it's not quite there yet, I think, for the application that you're talking about. But I think it's such an interesting idea. And one thing I would love to do is compose, like, if we mapped your brain, and then could we compose a song specifically to your brain to actually, or a set of songs, it would really be to actually put your brain in the different states that you wanted it to, and that you wanted to go to. And that, to me, that would just be the epitome of something that would be super cool, um, to work on. And I think these are, because AI is really trying to be good at pattern recognition, it would be very good at saying, here's a brain state, here's what we think the match to that would be. And so I think there is some potential out there with AI. Here's the downside to all this that we've been talking about. There's nothing better than live music. And I'll tell you why. Because when you're sitting in the room with Peppino, or you're sitting in the room with Peppino and me, and we're playing acoustic instruments, your entire brain and your entire body is being bathed in frequencies that you cannot hear across the internet or through your earbuds or anything else. And we have these things in our skin called mechanoreceptors that actually pick all this information up. So you don't only hear through your ears, you hear through many different ways. And, all music used to be live music. So this gets back to sort of AI and recordings and Spotify and all this other stuff. If you have the chance to come to live music, and I've been so interested in doing workshops and live music experience for people because of this reason. Sitting in the room, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, and then that's further reinforced by our instinctively tribal and social nature. So not only are you experiencing the raw frequencies, all the sound waves that hasn't been Fourier and analyzed into
Right.
oblivion to compress it into a WAV file or an MP3 file, but it's the real deal. And it's a holistic analog experience. Not only are you getting that, and this idea of our skin being having receptors too is
Hmm.
fascinating. I never thought of it that way because you could feel the tingle or the vibration of a great live show, but you're with like-minded souls, and there's a community zeitgeist, if you will, of other people, sometimes hundreds, thousands of people whose own skin is quivering and whose own brains and dopamine receptors are flaring, and that commonality and community further boosts that sense of stimulation, satisfaction, and happiness. So at its best, a
Yeah,
concert
boy. I'm
is
so glad you brought that up. And we actually have data on that. So you are sending out signals, physiological signals that are being picked up by other people. And they've done interesting studies where someone who has a certain heartbeat can stand outside a room, and the people inside the room, their heartbeat will start to beat in sync with the people outside the room. Like, we are entraining each other. And when you see good musicians, I mean, if you've ever seen good musicians, I'm sure you have noticed this, like they have a connection, the way they're looking at each other, making eye contact, smiling, and that just creates so much power that gets into the audience, and then you're all of a sudden creating a group entrainment that changes everything, changes your whole experience. And
yeah.
there's plenty of data on this where heartbeats start to sync up. um, you know, it's quite amazing. I mean, we are meant to be in connection with each other, and that's healthy for us.
And there are what could be, at least given our current perceptions, extrasensory connection points and conduits and experiences that we normally wouldn't ascribe to a collective togetherness like that. We take these things for
Yeah.
granted, and we think about them often simply cognitively or as a fun thing to do, but there's a lot going on many, many different levels. And it just reminds us again that we're mostly unconscious beings. We have this emergent awareness, real time, and we feel like we're in control. I'm going to raise my right arm, I'm going to lower it. Well, I'm in control, and my conscious self rules the roost, and it comprises 99% of my being because look, I'm making decisions and it's happening and I'm interacting in the real world, when the truth is the exact opposite.
Have you read that research on that? That is true. Yeah.
So it's the illusion of control, and we're kind of fooled by this emergent wrapper that we consider the self.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think you're also exactly right that there's levels of this that we're not aware of. And, music for some people really allows them to access this. And people will say, like, I had a transcendent experience that I've never had before in my life. It's interesting you brought up heavy metal because many people have a transcendent experience to heavy metal music. I mean, some of this music is helping people access states that we don't really, I mean, from a science perspective, we don't understand well, but they're very, very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And usually heavy metal is denigrated as satanic, counterculture, noise, garbage. But I personally would agree and reinforce that assertion that the genre itself has a magical quality of eliciting many of the responses that you have been referring to and that you research. Ozzy Osbourne, the the Prince of Darkness died a couple weeks ago. And the outpouring of attention and affection for this otherwise erstwhile creature
Yeah.
was, I think,
Unique, very unique.
reflective of what you're saying, which is there's something special. And I personally, as I began this conversation, attest to being affectionate toward that genre. I'll put a link in the description too of my very favorite song in the whole universe, which I listen to probably daily. It's called Passion and Opera by the band Nightwish. And if you can imagine Metallica guitars with a soprano opera singer.
Wow, that sounds cool.
And to me, this is like heaven on earth, because I get that sonic intensity, which is immersive and powerful and uplifting. And I get this transcendent, soothing female voice. And it's almost like peanut butter and chocolate. You know, you got a little peanut butter in my chocolate. it's a blending of these opposites: the heavy masculine with the gorgeous female, and it creates something that's greater than the sum of its parts, at least sonically and emotionally for me. So if we did that AI analysis of Mookie's response mechanism to songs, you would pump that in as a primary example of a piece of music that particularly resonates well with me cognitively, emotionally, and you could start there and you can't go
Wow.
wrong. And I would venture to assume that this would be the case for many people. There are folks who say, I like everything. They just say, I like everything. But I don't think they've paid close enough attention to themselves and their tastes, because I don't think it's an even playing field, right? And that would be confirmed by your research.
Well, first of all, I want to map your brain while you're listening to that song.
It takes me there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fascinating, and you're not the only person that's told me that. I think that's just so interesting. I did a concert with a guy named Callum Graham, another guitarist, and we were playing rock songs. I was playing pipe organ, and he was playing sort of rock songs. But a guy came up afterwards, and he was like, "You guys sound like Pink Floyd," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And so I went back and listened to a bunch of Pink Floyd, which I hadn't listened to in years. But I think Pink Floyd, that's what reminded me of this, is there's something about these contrasting sounds, this sort of orchestral part, and then this kind of almost harsh, edgy stuff, and how it gets integrated together. And it'd be in such a beautiful way. I mean, Pink Floyd, some of their stuff is just stunning, in my opinion.
I agree with you. And it epitomizes the idea of synesthesia. So
Yeah.
when you're blending multiple sensations, the conduits, the wiring of the brain gets in one sense jumbled. So you could see a sound, you can taste an emotion. And there are synesthetes, many of whom are famous artists, who take advantage of this. But I think in broader context, it embodies what you're getting at, which is when you're blending different approaches and when you're using music, which ostensibly is just stimulation of your ears, right, and the part of your mind that registers sound, it's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a
Oh, yeah.
blending that's going on. And you bring up Pink Floyd. Well, they had the psychedelic album covers. They had this motif of hallucination and storytelling and echo delay and this dreamlike sonic landscape, coupled with good old-fashioned love songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that nails it, which is what we're getting at here is a blending of sensation, stimulation, with often surprising cognitive and emotional responses.
Yeah, Callum and I put this song together, and I really wonder about this. It'd be so interesting to explore. And we put all these different rhythms in this same song. And I was like, we want to make this so complicated that people's brains just have to give up and just float off into space, you know? And in fact, when I did the EEGs on people, that seemed to be what happened. And I think this might be something about Pink Floyd, these heavy metal, very complicated. Some symphonic music is like this too. And so it's not always necessarily doing what we think it's doing, but there's something that's registering us in us that's saying this is hitting the mark. It's hitting something for us. Now, hopefully we use that in a good way and not in a bad way, right? Like you don't want to listen. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you do. Do you listen to heavy metal before you go to sleep? Would it help you sleep?
I have flat feet, bad vision. I had an upper hernia operation. So when you list out my congenital ailments, sleep is not on the list. And I'm
There
wondering
you
if I'm wired so much throughout the day that by the time I get to sleep, I'm so exhausted that I just
Yeah.
tune out. But for me, sleep is almost like a switch. I'm like a
Yes.
cat in a
Yeah.
box of rocks who
Yeah.
rolls up in there and I'm out. So
Yeah.
I'm not a very good candidate for your sleep therapy through music
Hmm.
because that's not my issue. Where music is much more pronounced in its therapeutic effects and in terms of improving my overall quality of life is in giving me that dopamine booster through excitement and also, as you say, distraction.
Hmm.
When I pop in that song, Passion in the Opera, I'm almost instantaneously taken there. You know, she takes me there, the band takes me there, and it can only be likened to a religious experience.
Wow.
And I
You
think there are
know,
many analogs to that.
yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to that. As soon as you post that, I'm pressing the button.
I'll send you the link.
I was talking about how the brain learns pain. I bet your brain has learned the reaction to this song. So probably if I played the first three notes of this song, your brain would go there.
That's right. I
Uh,
agree with you that the level of response and the ridiculous adoration I have for this song and this whole genre of symphonic Scandinavian heavy metal has a
I
lot
love
to
that.
do with the happiness I've already experienced listening to it.
Yeah, which is what's beautiful. I mean, that's really kind of what's beautiful about it because it increases the efficiency. So this is something that's worked for you, and now you can use it in a very efficient way.
Absolutely. And there are analogs throughout the many things that we do. Well, we pick up many bad habits as human
Mhm.
beings. Some would say most of our habits are pretty bad, but that's deceptive and artificially selective because when you look at our habits, we do 10,000 things every day without even thinking about them,
Mhm.
from autonomous motor movements to setting the table to doing the dishes to getting dressed to walking across the street, involving hundreds of muscles, perfectly coordinated. You could call these almost habits, subroutines of our mechanized deterministic existence, right? So some of these perkle up into what we would consider good and bad habits. Smoke cigarettes, bad
Mhm.
habit. Eat well, bingo, good,
Mhm.
right? Try to be a good person. That's a good habit to try to get yourself into. Be a jerk. That could be seen as a bad habit. So we have all of these habits that we indulge in on all these different levels. And I think this is a great opportunity to shake it up a little bit. It helps us pay better
Well,
attention and get out of our sweet spot, get
yeah,
out
I
of
think
the zone.
the brain becomes very automatic, and that's a good thing most of the time. But it can have its downside, right? So that's why we need to retrain ourselves with certain things. So if we don't want to eat chocolate anymore because we eat the whole 1 pound chocolate bar. We have to retrain ourselves and take the chocolate out of the house or whatever it is for a while, or find substitutes. And this is a lot about learning self-management techniques. I think the thing that's interesting about music is it actually makes it a little bit easier to do these things. It just helps you get over that threshold just a little bit more. So
Yeah.
if you've had a bad day and you're all mad because your podcast person you interviewed was super boring,
Yeah.
you can throw that music on and just forget about it for a minute.
It won't even be necessary after this conversation.
Well, you never know. You never know. But that's a good use, right, of music, because it's so easy. It's just so boring. That's the beauty of music. It's so easy compared to so many other things that we try to do.
Right. And I love that point you brought up that, my favorite song, I hear the first few measures and it's unmistakable and I'm in that happy place.
Yeah.
And it's boom, like that. And that's applicable to a lot of what you're espousing, which is take the path of least resistance. Life is hard. Figure out what works for you. And if it
Mhm.
works for you in a positively reinforcing capacity, it actually gets easier and easier, not harder and harder, because you're conditioning yourself in positive rather than negative ways. And music has this magical quality where it just activates. There's no buffer. If you hear someone express an opinion, you're cognitively processing it and you're trying to figure it out. But if you hear something that elicits this great response, physically, emotionally, you're not doing anything. Your body's automatically reacting to it, which is terrific. That's the kind of air quote therapy everyone wants. We're busy these days. You got 20 years for lying on a couch talking about your mom? Well, none of us we don't have that luxury.
Yeah, and I think what you hit on is just so beautiful, which is the automatic quality of this, because we know, so in the morning is when you have the most willpower, right? But as you go through the day, it's harder and harder to push through on things. And so, like, by nighttime, we're all eating junk food and all this stuff that we said we wouldn't do. We're watching crappy movies on TV, because we've worn out our willpower. Well, the
Right.
thing that's nice about music is it doesn't take willpower. Like, you can put that music on and just let it play. You don't have to push through and force yourself to listen to it. You can just let it do its magic in the background. And there's something so beautiful about that. I think for most of us who are just taxed, we're taxed just getting through our day.
Yeah. Yeah. Music it's not a be all end all, but it's
No, no, no.
when it's used in this manner and when you're focused on evidence-based optimization as you are, then the path is very straightforward and the application is almost effortless. You just need
Yeah, and
to get it going, right?
you said it exactly right. Music doesn't do everything, obviously. But if it can be your little helper, like, why wouldn't you let it help you out? And I think that's the really important thing about it. The thing that I'm trying to do, well, I think the two things that I'm trying to do with Pepino are a little bit different. One is to make curated music. So it's really designed around the brain, not that we didn't just make this up because we liked it and so we wanted you to like it too. We designed it around what the brain needed, at least many brains, not every brain, maybe not your brain, but maybe your brain. We don't know. And secondly, we actually have data. So we can show, I mean, if you pull up relaxing music on Spotify, you'll get a bunch of nice music. But is there data showing that it actually relaxed people? You know, I haven't
Yeah.
seen it if there is.
Yeah. On the back end, I'm sure they do a lot of analyses, but I highly doubt they've got EEGs hooked up to people listening to Spotify streams. It's probably statistical
Yeah,
analysis based on
yeah.
engagement. They can measure everything. So
Yeah.
they're dealing with hundreds of millions of listeners. Then they chop it up into individual categories, targeted segments, and
Hmm.
then just measure how long people listen to songs and group them into categories, do a multivariate analysis on a high level, call it a day. But it's a very
Yeah.
mechanistic, inhuman process, ostensibly with the goal of just mass consumption. They're not looking at helping anybody, they're looking at their stock.
Well, yeah, if you're looking at maximizing income streams, then you want to get people to listen to the most stuff, right? You're not asking the question, is the most stuff the best stuff for them to be listening to? Or
Yeah,
even maybe if it's good for them, is there something even better? So can you
right.
optimize? I mean, that's really the scientific question we're asking. That's not even in their purview, right? And I don't blame
And it's a raging debate whether more is better. Is the inherent quality of content based on its level of engagement? Well, if that's the case, then a teenager lighting his farts on fire who could get 10 million views on TikTok in 5 minutes is inherently better in quality than a classical violinist playing Vivaldi.
Well, yeah, and it's like, okay, what would you rather have for breakfast? A donut and coffee or something nutritious?
It,
So if we just said, well, let's give everybody donuts and coffee because that'll sell the most.
donuts sell better.
Yeah, what's the problem? So yeah, I think this is it's such a fascinating kind of problem to think about, and of course people in healthcare, it's been very difficult because we do all these things that are unhealthy for us because they give us a dopamine rush in the short run, and we're perpetuating this with many of these kind of marketing um, approaches that these platforms and other advertising is using. You set the cookies when you walk into the grocery store. What's first? It's the cookies and all the high sugar stuff and all the simple
Yeah.
carbs.
And as you're waiting in line, you got that Snickers bar.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
And if you do the analysis, you'd be shocked as to the volume of sales. Gas stations throughout the country, a majority of their profit doesn't come from selling gasoline, but selling candy at the counter.
Wow, is that right? Wow.
The last statistic I read is something like 30-40% of the profitability of these gas stations are bags of Doritos and Gatorade.
Man, that really says a lot about our lack of capacity to inhibit ourselves, doesn't it? Like we need to learn to inhibit ourselves.
Yeah, or at least channel it, find a catharsis. The biggest advantages that I've had throughout my life is taking what would be considered weaknesses and shifting them into strength. So I have this manic focus. Once I like something, that's it. I'm like this locomotive on the track and I'm going for it. So I recently published a novel, and wrapping this novel up, no exaggeration, for about 6 weeks, I worked on it for 18 hours a day,
Mhm.
nonstop, because I was almost at the end. I knew I could do it. I saw it. I was polishing that marble. After working on it on and off for about a year, that home stretch was this amazing, immersive experience. Now, is it healthy? Is it normal? But in retrospect, it was one of the most joyful times of my life because I was firing on all cylinders creatively. And that raw intensity in and of itself became its own dopamine engine for
Mhm.
me. So,
You see this in people. There are some people, some students, they call them immersive learners. They do very poorly in our traditional school system because they want to just focus on algebra for 4 or 5 months. They get obsessed. It's so fascinating, all the patterns in these numbers. And then they're like, okay, I'm done with that. Now I'm into, literature. And there's such a beauty in that. And of course, many musicians are like this too, right? I mean, I was just composing this piece of music, and it was the same thing as what you described. It's like I got up every morning and worked on it all day long, and anything else I had to do was an intrusion into that. And if you don't have other people that are suffering because of that, it can be really wonderful.
Yeah, we all make sacrifices. We don't want to inconvenience or hurt anybody, but everyone has not only their own learning style, but their own style of working, their own
Right.
style of producing whatever it is that they do. Led Zeppelin, you cited Pink Floyd as an example of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
kind of synesthetic, cool music. Led Zeppelin embodied this immersive, manic rush. If you read anything about the creation of their albums, most of them were done in this frenzied end game of only a matter of days in the studio for everything to fall together. And that was Jimmy Page's way of doing it. He fits into this bucket of someone where you can't just lay out a project plan and expect that guy to do it. And by any stretch of the imagination, most musicians and most of the fans of rock and roll consider him a transcendent genius. And when you
Right.
look at his work habit, it's batshit crazy.
And this sort of segues into a totally different conversation, but there's a really interesting book on this where they studied 600 people who became sort of eminent in their field and the characteristics of these people. And I think one of them is this capacity for that kind of intensive focus. And unfortunately, we don't often make room in our society for people who work this way. And
Not at
so
all. Not at all.
it makes it difficult if you are that person, but there's something to be said about following your muse and allowing this to be your authentic self and finding the kind of environment that actually can nurture and give you a container for that. But it can be a rough road, a rough road. I've worked extensively with gifted and highly gifted people in my practice. And this is one of the things they come up against all the time. And it's lonely. You feel like an outlier. I don't know what your experience is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a veteran of the agency world, marketing, PR, advertising, and that's at a frenetic, multitasked pace. So
Hmm.
hundreds of emails, project to project to project. And there's an aspect of my personality that thrived on that too. Because again, it's a dopamine booster
Hmm.
shot with every email, every client contact, every strategy session. But with time, I started to bottom out because that's not my primary way of working. It's not my primary way of enjoying what I do. And it lacked the creativity and expressiveness of this experience that I have just gone through. And
Hmm.
one of my greatest accomplishments, I have two boys, and that's a great accomplishment. And there's a string of things that I could say I'm proud of doing as a human being. But nothing compares to this latest stretch embodied by this insanely immersive capper of finally writing the book I always wanted to read. And ever since I was in my early 20s and figured that this is something I would want to do, life has a way of distracting and providing other options. And none of that ever goes to waste because we're always learning and we're always growing. But the blessed joy of being able to fulfill my lifelong goal of writing the book that I would want to read to my own hypercritical satisfaction is an epic accomplishment engendered by a highly unconventional way of going about doing exactly that. So, in retrospect, many of my struggles and my misalignment at school in working environments have to do with the reality that this nutty way of doing things is my most comfortable and productive way of doing things. And that's just me.
Yeah.
That's how my mind is wired.
Yeah. What I would say is that in order to optimize your brain, The cultural context in which you grew up did not allow the optimization of your brain, in terms of the process of creativity and what you really needed to be your most productive and true self. When we lived in an agrarian culture, people who had ADHD were at an advantage, right? Because you had high energy, you could move through the day, you could fix the fence, deal with the cattle, do this and
Yeah.
that. You were moving around all the time. Now, all of a sudden, we call it a disorder. So, some
Yes.
people call ADHD the hunter mind. So, the best hunters are the people who orient to every twig that's snapping, this and that and the other thing. Now, we want you to sit down and conform and listen to the teacher and read the book. I don't view these alternative ways of being in the world as being disorders or strange or weird. They might be mismatches. We have a very traditional, kind of conventional, uh, what would we call homogeneous way we want people to fit into the world. And many of these musicians that we're talking about, I mean, they didn't fit, did they?
They had the luck of becoming rich and famous, so
Yeah,
it
right.
became
The
it
ones
became
we know about.
self-reinforcing. If
Yeah,
if 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 you win a Grammy, you're a genius. But if you never make it, then you're a weirdo loser.
right.
So the problem with a lot of it is we appraise a human based on objective metrics, not all of which are reflective of either the integrity, hard work, or even creativity of the individual. It's just you made it, so
Yeah.
you're awesome.
Sadly, we look at money and yeah, we look at money and we look at numbers of consumers as metrics of this, and that's a very poor metric. But tell me a little bit about your book because I'm excited to read it now.
Oh, this is terrific. This is the great thing about podcasts, and one reason that people love podcasts so much is it's a free flowing conversation. So you're not just limited to one area of focus. But I think I could bring it back to our overall conversation too. It's called Johnny Fazuli and the Transfinite Reality Engine. It's a Roald Dahl kind of James
Oh
and the
man.
Giant Peach kind of title. And the essential theme focuses on this predicament we're in as mere mortals, where we know not only that we're going to die, but we're reminded of limitation every second of our lives. We want to do so much. We want to meet and be with our true love, someone who is a perfect partner for us. We want to be self actualized, and we're, in a sense, in a world of infinite possibility. So the delta between our own inherent limits in terms of our ability and our capacity to meet people and learn things and accomplish our goals is in such opposition to what we feel as this limitless expanse, which has been further reinforced scientifically and speculatively as living in a multiverse of possibility. So I use that as a backdrop for trying to understand how we can find our true sense of self and do so
Hmm.
in a way where it makes sense to who we are and to what we really want in terms of fulfilling our individual purpose. That's kind of the backdrop. And I've been fascinated by this idea of multiple possibilities since I was a kid. And I brought it to bear in terms of this narrative where this hustler con man accidentally falls into the idea of developing a machine, kind of like H.G. Wells' time machine, only instead of jumping from one era to the other in this universe, he could physically teleport himself to any one of a number of universes in the multiverse. And it tells the story of this guy, Johnny, who's a very reprehensible yet likable person who goes about discovering this as his next scam, never for a moment believing he can actually do it. And of course, voila, off he goes, and hilarity ensues. And along the way, I take a look at the generation gap between the cusp boomers, as I am, the Zoomer Gen Z, the millennials, the Gen Xers. We're in this frothy mix of everyone competing with each other and trying to find their own identity. The gender warfare that's taking place right now between men and women are doing so much better than men, especially with the Gen Zers. And this friction that exists, and get into the root of why this is going on. So Johnny is a Zoomer male. He's a video game addicted, narcissistic jerk. And he falls for Penny Pitts, who is a type A, list making, go get some, hyper achieving, wonderful Gen Z female. And that is the source of a lot of romantic tension in the novel as well. So I try to frame it in this grand theme of our own mortality and limit within the infinite multiplicity of possibility and what that means for us as people, and tell that story through the conflicts that we're experiencing right now, emotionally, in terms of this generation and gender gap, as well as politically in terms of our deep polarization. And the bow on top of all of that, the icing on the cake of the narrative, is that these are all elements of the same thing. We're blasted by all these streams and content sources. We don't know where to look and what to do. And yet our sense of humanity and connection to ourselves and the world, where did it go? What are our values? What the hell are we doing? And of course, I have no real answers, but at the very least, I try to bring that out in terms of a compelling narrative.
Wow. That I cannot wait to read your
All
book.
right.
I'm going to start. Is it out? I'm starting tonight.
All right. I'll send you a link, and I'll put the link as a shameless promotional into the podcast as well.
Well, we got to talk some more, because there's so many things that, I mean, the whole gender stuff is just, it's just such a fascinating conversation, and so much going on with that. But the sort of interesting thing, so Peppino and I did a retreat with some people in June, and it was really on becoming your authentic self, because we've lost, which is part of the theme of your book, right? Sometimes it's very easy to lose who you really are in this world, because we're so inundated with all these other messages about possibilities, or who we should be, or who we've gotten trapped into being. And we actually used music and writing, and I say art, but it's not really art. It's more just like making drawings or stuff, not performance based at all, just as ways of helping explore who you really are, can authentically move into being in this world. And, these are so foundational. This is just such a critical issue, because so many of us have gone along. I don't know what your experience is. And we're like, oh, we did this. We're supposed to do this. We're supposed to do that. We did this. We did that. We got a regular job. And then in the end, you're like, man, now I'm 65 years old. Like, I'm not all that happy. And what do I do?
Yeah. And you know what's fascinating? You're bringing up, well, now I'm 60, 65, and now I have this existential crisis of identity and purpose. This is happening for 25-year-olds now.
Well, yes.
And in an acute kind of way. On this podcast, I interviewed a Gen Z female, and it was absolutely fascinating, because she is a digital nomad. She's in Tokyo. She is in Singapore. She's working. She's a marketing consultant. And she brought up many of these issues too. And I came to the realization that this is central to what's awesome and what's broken in our society right now. And I created the character Penny Pitts, to embody that sensibility. And in juxtaposition, with the other side of the house, which is men who are unable or unwilling to connect with people anymore.
Yeah.
Thanks to COVID, thanks to video games, thanks to a host of circumstances, younger men are
So many men are
disassociated and
really, really
lonely.
struggling.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And my own kids. I have an 18 and a 22-year-old embody many of these
Hmm.
characteristics of a struggling generation. Some would say a lost generation. I know I sound like that old fogey where, stop listening to that rock and roll. It's going to make you crazy. But I think we are in acute crisis. And a lot of it, and this is a point in my novel too, is kind of our fault as boomers or borderline boomers. We have created this world that the younger generation now has to deal with. And part of it is the technology that's been introduced into it with no constraints, with no guidance, with no thought of its implications aside from how much money that they can make. And it's a real tragedy with implications we don't quite understand. And I
Yeah.
take this to its logical level, which is what happens when you have infinite power and an infantile sensibility.
Yeah. We've always had this issue. It's just become amplified. So, right
Right.
when Gutenberg started to print books, and people were like, that is so bad because you're going to give books to all these dumb people and they're not going to know what to do with them. And then when TV came in, or radio, when radio came in, we heard the same thing, and TV. And, it's really fascinating to me. And you brought up AI. It's this whole issue of ethical and healthy use of these resources. And we have, yes, I think you're right. We've been very poor at utilizing these for our own health.
Yeah, the problem is control. See, so you say, well, maybe some of this should be regulated or we should put guidance around it. Part of that problem is who is going to put the
Yeah.
guidance around it based on what constraints. And this begs the question of who's really in control of anything and what information is veridical and what isn't. We're in an age where everything is doubted. Nothing is true. And when nothing is true, then everything is possible. And we're all living in this multiverse. And
Yeah. And how come you don't have the answer in the back of your book? That's what I'm looking forward to. I want to look in the back.
it's the first book in a series, so it
Oh, there
continues.
you go.
Maybe by the time I'm on the third or fourth one, something is gonna happen. Like my other self in another universe is gonna give me a little wink
You're going
and
to keep us
a
hooked
hint.
in. Yeah, I can see that for sure. Well, we're doing that too because we're going to have the next album and the next album and the next album. So,
That's great. We can run in parallel, right? You could be
yeah,
cranking out
exactly.
your calming series, and I can be cranking out the Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse.
Yeah. Well, these songs for focus, I mean, they're much more activating. And I think this comes back to like just so many of this stuff is how do you use what you're exposing yourself to in a good way for yourself. And even your writing, like maybe there are times you want to stay up till 2 a.m. and write. You don't want to do that every night, but there are times when that's optimal, right? So we don't want to get so rigid about some of this stuff that it actually undermines our well-being. But I think these are very complicated issues. The generational stuff is just so fascinating. And this discrepancy between males and females in terms of achievement and capacity to be in relationships with people and on it, we could just go on and on about this. And how do we address this and make life better for everyone?
Get over ourselves. Another aspect, just to put a capper on it, that I've been struggling with for years is when a painter paints, they've got a canvas and it's a limited amount of surface area. And when a sculptor sculpts, They could be like Michelangelo. They'll start with the big chunk of marble that he arm wrestled Leonardo to get, and it became David. But that's it. He's got that block of marble, and then he works on it. Now, when you're a writer, it's linear, but it's really open-ended. There are no constraints that are put on you as a writer. So a paragraph could be a quick gasp or an onomatopoeic boom, 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 or a knock at the door. Or it can go for 20 pages like David Foster Wallace. And it's hell's bells, you know, it doesn't have the structure of poetry. And yet, as a writer and a reader, I've yearned for that. I did computer programming when I was in college on the old Apple IIe, and I was fascinated by the nested string of code and the routines and the subroutines, and it was beautiful. And there's a lot of poetry I like. So one thing that I've been wrestling with is partly the ADHD too, is I'm typing 90 words a minute. Where do I end? Where do I start? How do I draw constraints around a narrative in ways that are aesthetically appealing and at the same time make it a fun, breezy, easy read? And then how can I structure it in a way that as a writer, it's most efficient in terms of editing? And I came to the realization that if I impose ad hoc but rigid constraints on prose, it could be interesting. So if you take a look at Johnny Fazuli and the Transfinite Reality Engine, the non-dialogue lines are all 3-line paragraphs of 175 to about 190 characters, about 30 words each, and not a single one deviates. When you look at the pages, they are neatly, symmetrically lined like lyric poetry. And I stuck with it. I learned how to do it. I got into it, and it was a total joy editing it, because if normally as a writer, you've got all these ad hoc, free-flowing paragraphs. And if you make a change, you need to start chopping your stuff up and moving stuff around and rewriting it. And I had Lego pieces of prose. And then I could optimize the settings and move things around based on individual and chunks of 3-line paragraphs, which made it modular and scalable. So I think I created some new kind of prose. And the reactions I've gotten so far from readers are, A, they don't notice. I went to so much effort, and they're like, they don't even comment on it. And others are like, this is a fun, breezy read, because it's like the internet. It's like scrolling on Twitter, X. And it gave it this very contemporary, immediate kind of pop, which is reflective of the insanity that I'm talking about in the book. We're in a culture of it's got to happen now, and it's got to happen fast. And if you don't excite me and thrill me in 2 seconds, then I'm leaving your video, your page, your image.
Yeah.
And it translated into old school prose, which hardly anyone is consuming. And
Well,
I went for that.
I think you might have answered your own question to the meaning of life and reality of it. Is, you have to create your own constraints, and your own constraints are what allow you to flower. So you see this, I mean, I composed this song about 6 months after I started taking lessons from Peppino, and I was like, I'm just going to make a list of everything he's taught me how to do. And there were 10 things on that list, like bends and harmonics and this, tapping and this and that. And then I'm going to make a song, and it has to have all those things in it. So I set these constraints up, and it gave this song a structure that it wouldn't have had otherwise if I just would have been flailing. Oh, wow, let's wait for some inspiration, and then some song is going to burst forth, and it'll be the most beautiful thing ever written. So I sat down and I composed this song, and it's actually pretty good, because it was those constraints that allowed the song to become what it was. And
100%.
if you think about this as analogous to life, so you say there's infinite possibilities. So when there's infinite possibilities and infinite multiverses, how do we pick a set of constraints that allows us to actualize who it is we want to be?
Bingo. That's the internal paradox and contradiction of writing a book centered in a mathematical multiverse and insisting that each paragraph has got to be 3 lines long. It's patently absurd, but to your exact point, that's why you want it's overwhelming. I
Yeah.
can't do this. I got to narrow it down and I got to follow some basic rules. And most artists will tell you their best work comes from everything going wrong. They're down to a drop dead deadline. They don't have time to tinker and they just got to do it. Back to Jimmy Page and
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin, where he's in a van with a guitar laying tracks from one venue to the other, which became the album. And it has the intensity and spontaneity and raw energy of that freaky limitation, as opposed to someone who sits around and ruminates about blues music, gets an advanced degree, and and then what?
Yeah, I mean,
You got to do it.
it's the creative process, and it's about getting out of an algorithm, right? So you created a different algorithm for yourself. I was having a conversation with a musician yesterday, and I said, I think music school was really bad for me because it was all about conforming to playing everything the perfect way.
Yeah.
And so you could conform in your writing to what a writer is, quote, supposed to do with this certain paragraph structured chapters, la, la, la. Or you create your own form and then you adhere to that. That's where that's where the creative process really starts to shine. When you can do that, it means everything.
I think so. And then it became gamified. Every
Yeah,
it's
right?
like if I've exhausted all 3 lines, then I still have something to say. And if I can't go to another 3 lines, then I have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite that initial paragraph to make it fit. And it forced me to be increasingly more succinct. And it forced me to phrase things and to think of things in ways I otherwise wouldn't. And that's a terrific benefit too.
Yeah. Do you think your writing became richer because of that? Yeah.
Absolutely. And the breathlessness that went into trying to get the damn words to fit into 3 lines, although it's very syntactic and it sounds very remedial and mechanistic, that translated into this whimsical and fast moving and almost thrilling quality, in my humble opinion, of the narrative itself. It's at a very brisk pace. And even when I get into high concept, or what's called in the genre hard science fiction, I'm talking about
Yeah.
ideas and theories. I think those are kind of breezy too, because even if you don't understand exactly what the hell I'm talking about, it's moving so fast and it's contextually so grounded in this sprawling story that you just keep turning and hopefully want to know what happens next to Johnny and Penny and Casey and real world characters. I like that juxtaposition between ideas and the visceral characteristics of an emergent drama of real humans who have a goal and they've got obstacles. And
It's so interesting. Really, what you're talking about is creating layers, layers of meaning or layers of message, if you want to talk about it that way. And one layer sort of pulls you through, right? You have to have this layer. If everything is down here in this sort of intense, deep science, hard stuff, you can't move. It just makes it so much harder and effortful to move through it. That you have this other thing that just kind of breezes you along. And then I think that's so fascinating. And of course, when you think of orchestral music, or actually a lot of this heavy metal stuff you're talking about is like this too. You have these lyrical floating lines, and then you have this heavy kind of beat happening.
Yeah, like my favorite song, which I'll send to you, which is the Metallica guitars and booming double bass drums and
Yeah.
this Finnish opera singer belting it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and it's also, again, like, how do you use constraints to create a message that's more powerful than it would be if you didn't have constraints? If you just wrote off the top of your head and it was like some, like, narrative about what's going through Mookie's brain, we would all probably last about 4 pages, right?
Yeah, if that, and that's a big. I've written like thousands of pages that way with like a free flowing, just catharsis of journaling release. But that's not storytelling. That's not
Yeah.
literature. And I learned the hard way that it's not about the ideas, but it's about the human passion. And human passion alone can be redundant or repetitive, and it's not really anchored in some of the difficulties of especially today's world. So I strive to create a narrative with very real people who embodied the crises, but also the opportunities of living in 2025
Mhm.
with the reality of science as we're starting to understand the world and the amazing possibilities and also threats afforded by our expanding knowledge of the universe. And I got them together, just like you described, where it's like Jung described the enantiodrama. I
Mhm.
probably mispronounce it, but it's a
Mhm.
bringing together of opposites.
Mhm.
And that's where it's the hot and sour soup. It's a way of jacking everything up. Some would say it's over the head and between the legs. It's like very sophisticated and at the same time very banal.
Mhm.
And it's in those contradictions, that yin yang blend, where you get that kinesis and that excitement, and hopefully the art that drives the story where you want to find out what happens next.
So do you really think life has gotten more complex, or do you think we're still really in the dilemmas that Shakespeare was writing about, or, you know, some of these even maybe back further writers? Like the essential dilemmas are still really the same?
Oh, 100,000%.
Mhm.
Human beings have evolved slowly, and Homo sapiens, our species, if you look back maybe 70,000 years, 100,000 years, we cohabitated the planet with multiple species throughout our gestation, if you will, as this now sentient creature, right? And of those tens of thousands of generations, it's only in the past few where we have running water, where we even have groups of humans larger than, let's say, 60, 70, 80, maximum 100 people, because the environment couldn't sustain it. We would either run out of resources or we would contaminate the water supply.
Right.
So, for
Mhm.
most of our existence on this planet, we've been in tiny tribal groups with certain instinctive mechanisms like genetic drift programmed into us. So, so when you ask, our is it Shakespearean in terms of how we're living now? It's Cro-Magnon, it's Neanderthal. We haven't changed at all since since we probably got out of Africa. So I think that's the heart of the human condition and the essence of many of our problems, because we think like we did then, we act like we did then, and it worked wonderfully from a social Darwinian vantage point, proven by the fact that we're here right now. All that struggle. At one point, there was a super volcano, and there were only something like 1,200 humans, they think,
Mhm.
left. So we've been up against arduous and unlikely odds, and whoa, we made it, for better or for worse, all thanks to instinct. But it's these exact same instincts that now plague us and could lead to our collective destruction, because we think locally, not globally. We're selfish little greedy primates.
Yeah. So
And
what do you think the solution is?
I think the solution is just we just keep at it. I don't think
Yeah.
we're going to evolve out of this anytime soon, and certainly not fast enough to preclude Armageddon. But I just think we got to keep trying. And I think as a backup, we should probably, inhabit the moon, go to Mars.
Send a few people, send a few people away so they'll survive.
Yeah, because we really might not make it. But along the way, it's been a great ride.
Well, there is kind of interesting. So, if there's a bunch of research in social psychology on, how do you get people that are different from each other to sort of coalesce, and of course, a lot of it is just you got to start having them interact with each other as humans. So you put them on the same team, and people that they think they hate, like I hate black people. So you put them on a team with black people. And then after a while, they're like, oh, black people aren't so bad. They're actually real human beings. But you couldn't have ever changed their mind by making an argument about that. It had
Oh,
to be lived experience.
and that's the biggest problem with our online world, where instead of bringing people together, it's like exactly what you were talking about with your song list, your recommended songs. They're reflecting your prior behaviors. And as the internet fragments people even more instead of unifying them, there was a hope that when the World Wide Web got up and going, that it would be the great equalizer, that
Mhm.
truth would bubble up to the top, and it would lead to globalization and save the world. And it's done pretty much exactly the opposite in many ways. It's led to conspiracy theories burgeoning and growing. It's led to a distrust of the other because we're clumping in like-minded groups. And all of this has been fed off these algorithms that just seek monetization and not harmony.
Well, it'd be interesting to create algorithms that people could opt into, that maybe this is a good project that would allow for this more dispersed experience. So I think of good things the internet has done. For example, when they have these pop up or these internet things in China where you can get through and people can get on the internet and be exposed to each other, or women in certain countries
Yeah.
where women are not allowed to have a voice, sneak onto the internet. Or I see with some of my super highly gifted people who feel so alone, and they find somebody in Brazil and they live in Ohio that they can have a conversation with about mathematical physics. I mean, this is the beauty of the capacity to connect at a distance. Now, the question is, how can we make this part of our online experience? So you and I are having a conversation today, and we've never met each other before. And I think you're quite a fascinating person. Like, what a gift!
Ditto,
Uh,
ditto,
like,
ditto. And I apologize if I'm coming off as the doom scrolling. There's a section in Johnny called Doom Scroll Bro.
no, I don't think so. But I mean, maybe we need to make a little startup that's like, you want to rebel against Big Brother? Opt out. Like this is the algorithm that's going to expose you to stuff, like different stuff that you would never see before. Yeah.
I'm generally Pollyanna about the internet and digital and even AI. I think that there's not only a silver lining, but I think it's net positive.
Uh-huh.
But there are a lot of distractions, and people need to care more about making those connections and about holistic value rather than the almighty dollar, which is now that's fake too. Now everything's going crypto, right? It's just nutty.
At some point you're like, when is this shell game gonna collapse? You just don't know about that. But I think it's interesting to think about what are some possible solutions here and how might these be implemented. And um, I think it's so easy because of the way, for example, media, what drives media is this sort of same thing, right? When they put something negative out, nobody said, oh, 14,000 people helped a little old lady across the street. That isn't what sells media. And yet that stuff is happening all the time in our world. And it's just so interesting to try to think about what's the alternative. How can we use these things for the good instead of getting stuck in this kind of negative cycle? But we have internet addiction. I mean, this issue you bring up about young boys, I can't tell you how many clients I get where parents are like, I can't get them off the internet. I unplug everything in the house. They get up at 2 in the morning, plug everything back in, or they get on their phone. If I take their phone away, they get on a friend's phone. I mean, there's no, there's so much, to think about with the kind of world we've created for ourselves.
You know what I think might be one, and this is again a very Pollyanna vision, loaded with caveats. But remember, we were talking about the quantified self?
Yeah.
How if
Mhm.
you analyzed my brain and put Passion and Opera by Nightwish into the computer, and you measured the receptors, you could really create an amazing playlist for me that can do all sorts of stuff by what? Having transparent and comprehensive analysis of my body matched with external stimuli that would engender the most favorable result. It's about analysis and connectivity based upon goals.
Yeah, based
In
upon positive goals.
positive goals. So now extrapolate that scenario that I just described to even the young boy who is obsessed by the internet, to just about any kind of human scenario or problem, or for that matter, opportunity. If you had transparent and comprehensive analysis of each individual person, access to that data, and then you have the capability to analyze that data through the lens of goal optimization. And if you place on top of that a willful determination to do good, to accomplish goals that are beneficial to the individual and de facto an entire society, then you have this artificial general intelligence enlightened despot. You're able
Mhm.
to connect people with stimuli and with opportunities that best match who they are, how they interact with the world, to their betterment.
Yeah,
So
and I think that brings up a lot of ethical issues about control and power. And maybe we need some evil in this world. I mean, we could make this argument in order for things to change and evolve. Like this could get very complex, but bringing it back, very dangerous. And Big Brother is a huge issue, or maybe we should call it Big Sister or Big Person. Big Person.
it's like the old idea that you would never transact online. You would never get into a car with a stranger. You would never share personal information on the internet. And here we are staying in a stranger's house with Airbnb. We're Ubering all the time. And we're in the Starbucks paying our taxes or paying bills from our laptop computer. We have sacrificed privacy and personal information and even security for convenience.
That's
And
totally
it's
true.
and it's been a slippery slope, and it's been progressively expanding. So if we get to the point where our DNA and the essence of who we are gets shared, and if people have access to it, then this will lead in two directions. One is a complete violation of our security and privacy, and on the other, an unprecedented opportunity to conveniently meet our goals in ways that are unimaginable to us now. There's no answer, right?
I think medical ethics and ethics in general is just fascinating because we are starting to live in this future already. This isn't science fiction anymore. It's
Yeah,
actually happening.
right.
I want to come back just to the internet addiction thing for a minute, though, because to get more, I don't know, grounded a little bit in that discussion.
We're abstracting, which is
Yeah,
fun.
that's good. It's all fun. But when you get an addiction to something, whether it's alcohol or the internet or something else, I think the question to ask, it's not just, oh, take that away, like go live real life. It's like, what are you getting out of that you're not getting out of life? So what are our 18 to 25-year-old or 14, however, to 40-year-old guys that are on the internet, what are they getting out of that they're not getting out of real life? And how do we make real life more successful and satisfying for them? And we're not really asking that question and creating those conditions for those people. Because most of the time, if something's working for you, you would like to do that.
Yeah, this is a complicated question in the sense of flipping your perspective around a little bit. Are the 18 to 20, 22, 24-year-olds addicted to the internet because they don't have an alternative, or are they addicted because they've been given the alternative that is the internet with no controls and no guidance? So a lot of child therapists insist that we need to not just take phones away from children, but not even allow them access to the digital universe until their adolescence, or maybe even beyond that point.
What do you think of that?
I don't know. I can kind of understand where that's coming from, but as a dad, practice what you preach what you practice. I just let them go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I figured it would be impossible to bottle that genie. And also, we live in a digital world. So just adapt, get into it, and then see how you could deal with the implications, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back into this idea of big brother. Did I want to be a big brother to my kids in terms of micromanaging their digital content consumption? I didn't really want to go there. Should I have done it more than I did? That's possible. But I don't think that squeezing it off and out is necessarily a solution to that. I like what you're saying, which is provide other fun stuff for people to do. And, is the internet all that? What about reality? What about going somewhere? What about going on a date?
Yeah, we may need to scaffold that in ways that we didn't. We put kids in schools where they just feel horrible about themselves. Like, no guy can live up to the macho male stereotype. So, like, how do we make it okay to be this imperfect human? You watch a movie, you have to be the perfect kisser, and sex is always wonderful. It's like, no, all this stuff is awkward and weird, and you don't know what you're doing. Like, we've just set up a set of standards for people that makes it. I mean, come on. Wouldn't you rather be successful and goof around in Minecraft than go out there and feel like you're an idiot around some girl? Like, I see the total appeal.
Games are doped, right? They're set up to be positively reinforcing. Even if you lose a round or a battle, you're automatically placed with people who are more or less in your skill set. So it's competitive and you're not getting your ass kicked like you would in the real world. And it's loaded with little goodies for you to constantly keep the dopamine pumped. And it's set up from a gamified point of view for maximum engagement. And the world, to your point, outside is often set up in the opposite way. It's competitive, it's unfair, and you need a lot of grit and patience to accomplish sometimes even the most remedial goals. Yeah. So that juxtaposition and that dichotomy between a real world where the girl might not accept my request, where I feel awkward, where it's not going to end like Pornhub, then why even bother?
Yeah, and I kind of get that. Like, I can see how the world would feel so threatening. And how do we make this where this stuff is okay? Like, I think maybe
Right.
when we didn't have all this information. So my mom's 99 and a half. And so
That
she
bodes
lived.
well for you.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, because I got a lot of work to get done. But she predates radio and all this kind of
Oh,
stuff. But she remembers like listening to this record that she and my dad used to listen to when they were in college. And she said, we were so dumb. It was this little sweet little romantic thing. She's like, we were so dumb. We didn't know what reality was like at all. And then we, got married and had kids and reality set in. Well, we're like in the extreme version of this
yeah.
where we don't know what reality is like at all. And then how do we help ourselves get out there and experience that a little bit and really start to appreciate the richness of what this has to offer, which you can't really find on the internet. I mean, talking to another person that you really connect to is so much better than being on a game. But how many people do you have to go through? How do you find those people? How do you find those opportunities? How do you not feel like a jerk? This is the challenge.
Yeah, a huge one. Back to my book for just a second, because I think it's relevant to this
Yeah, yeah.
exact conversation. The character of Johnny Fazuli. I deliberately picked a ridiculous name for this guy. It goes back in Chicago. I worked at a bar and we used to say, "Hey, give me that Fazuli." A lot of Italians. Where's that Fazuli?
Yeah.
I tweaked his name from Johnny Johnnny to Jonnie to kind of match
Uh-huh.
with the Fazuli. And I created a Gen Z male superhero deliberately. He is narcissistic, video game and drug addicted. He is a social media influencer, extreme sports exhibitionist, and a fake startup king. I took all the reprehensible qualities of this archetypal Gen Z male failure and
Mhm.
I dialed them all up to 11 in a personality where instead of living in self doubt and self victimization, he externalizes them to satiate his infinite hedonism. And the reason I did this was to highlight this absurd situation where men have turned themselves into the basement dwelling incel. And Johnny is that basement dwelling incel who nonetheless has the wherewithal to try to transform the world in his image. So I don't know if it's a solution to the problem, but I felt by creating this personality, I highlight and accentuate the dilemma, but also illustrate a potential way out, which is get out of the basement, go out there and express yourself, even if you think and are a moron, and at least engage with the world to learn something, to do something. And it's this personality that I put in juxtaposition with the ultimate overachieving female.
Mhm.
And I thought that would be fun chemistry to highlight everything that's wrong, but also potentially salvageable from
Yeah,
the
well,
mess we're in.
here's something I'll say about that is people that have the capacity to have that kind of focus on a computer game, or and actually a lot of these games take a lot of you really do have to compromise. You're on a team with people, you have to learn how to work with other people, you have to learn how to be social with them. Like, there's a lot of positives that you can actually transfer out into the real world if you can just start to get over that hump a little bit.
Yeah, and apply what you're good at in the virtual world to the real world. And in Johnny's case, regardless of results, where, beat me, bore me, don't ignore me. As long as he can get attention, even if it's through unscrupulous means, even if everyone's laughing at him, he's okay because he is at least getting the commodity, which is now the new money of our age, which is attention. Me. You're focused on me, good, bad, or ugly. The sole purpose of my existence and the confirmation of my validity as a human is if I could get some internet time. And
Wow.
that's become the metric. And I think it's tragic, but at the same time comically absurd. And I take that to its extreme in this character. I think every age has a literary character who embodies what's going on. Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the characters, all the characters from Kill a Mockingbird, right?
Yeah.
It's a snapshot of an era. And I
Yeah.
did my best for Johnny and Penny and Casey to be that snapshot of our insane situation in 2025, but do it in a way which is whimsical and actually kind of optimistic, where
Yeah.
you throw all of this into the mix, and instead of being hypercritical and preachy, show some of the opportunity and energy and creativity that's there, and let them duke it out amongst themselves, laugh along the way, maybe learn a thing or two, and realize that if we are in this infinite multiverse, well, let's not forget all the possibilities, and let's embrace the opportunity to at least become a little bit better
Mm-hmm.
and happier and
Yeah.
improve not only our own quality of life, but those around us,
Yeah.
if we can.
Totally agree.
If
What
we
can I
can.
say?
If we can.
100%.
If we can. Well, I
Yeah.
think that's a great way to sign off. I
Yeah.
want to sincerely thank you for your time on the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm going to put links to your website and to your wonderful music for using music to
Yeah. And
calm
the
and to
website is
soothe.
musicandhealing.net, not
Great.
.com,
.net.
musicandhealing.net.
.net. You got that domain. Okay. And I'll put it in as a dynamic link in the description. So folks can access us or have accessed us from Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. It'll be in the description. I'll put my favorite song in there too. I'll put a link to the book out of
Yeah,
shameless promotion.
you should, because I'm
Yeah,
reading
and
that
it's
book
been
and I'm
delightful
listening to that
talking to you.
song.
Let's crank this up again in 6 months or so, a year. See how your
Yeah,
therapy is going, and then see how our society is adapting to
love
all
to.
this
Yeah, we should
all
have
this
our
crazy stuff.
PTSD album pretty much finished by then. So, yeah,
I'd be curious to see how the music differs,
it'll be different.
qualitatively and
Yes.
quantitatively, right? I'm just guessing. You're the expert. You need to shake people a little bit out of their comfort zone, because their comfort zone is a state of anxiety and crisis. It's just like MDMA has been tested for PTSD,
Mhm.
ketamine, even methamphetamine, and I think it all has to do with getting out of the zone of normalized terror.
Yep. Yep. That's a big part of it. Yeah, and there's complications, which just makes it so fascinating. So this will be a whole different set of genres within this.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be intrigued to listen. Maybe it'll have some interesting effect on my ADHD brain. You never know.
Yeah,
That could
you
be.
never
See
know.
if they
Yeah.
got some crossover, some sy-
Oh, there will be, because
synes-
these things share nodes. So yeah,
yeah,
there will be.
synesthetic kind of
Yeah,
crossover,
yeah,
right? Well,
yeah.
thank you so
All
much
right.
for
Well,
your
thank you
time.
so much for your time too. It's been just a joy to chat.